The algorithm reckons you should be watching this video next, and I recommend that you should be always watching my video. So, click with energy! And yes, clicking that does help the channel. Thank you very much. Story number 1. The Centaurian Crag'nik War. Written by British Tea Company. There was a hush as the galactic community decided who they were afraid of more. The Crag'nik tyrant, Lord Zulan, or the human emperor, Vergus. The two belligerent rulers stood up at the podium, both refusing to back down at the other's challenge. Like two alpha males in a pack, the two creatures challenged one another. The Crag'nik Empire was not a welcoming sight. Large, grey humanoids at 7 to 8 feet tall. Their bodies were extraordinarily muscular, and their mouths were brimmed with razor-sharp teeth. The Crag'nik had attained a nasty reputation for being an evil and warmongering race which had enslaved and ravaged many races. Crag'nik slave camps were brutal, and it was well known that the Crag'nik incinerated disobedient slaves for energy, or simply cooked and ate them. The humans, or the Centaurian Empire, really weren't a welcoming sight either. At around 6 feet, the humans weren't as intimidating size-wise, but there was something about them that was unsettling. It was well known that their original homeworld had been irradiated rock, for hundreds of years of life still persisted. Humans commonly were seen as layers of heavy armor, although they claimed that the armor was for anti-radiation purposes. It didn't take a genius to realize that the sharp pauldrons and the armor-like carapace and the aggressively shaped helmet that they wore were hallmarks of a combative species. The conflict occurred when the Centaurian Empire and the Crag'nik Empire had claimed a few dozen systems at the same time. Friction developed between the two empires as muscles were flexed and insults were exchanged. The Centaurian Empire was a mystery. When they expanded their borders, no one knew much about what happened afterwards. The humans had a fetish for withholding information, and were known to make nosy guests disappear. Even their appearance was often withheld. Many times, an outsider would never know what the human underneath his or her armor looked like. The Crag'nik Empire was open in ways everyone wished they weren't. Public executions, public massacres, public purges, recordings of brutal slave camp conditions, and even entire channels dedicated on how to kill disobedient slaves were a thing that existed within their empire. Using this information, the Crag'nik broadcast their vile ways to the entire galaxy. Many reviled them. There were few that had the strength to stand up against them. Lord Zulan's deadly teeth twisted into a repulsive smile as he looked down at the human emperor. His words oozed with an arrogance that the Crag'nik boasted in many things. His species had been born as apex predators of its world, unifying themselves in brutal global warfare. When they had reached the stars, nothing could oppose them. Certainly not the Centaurian Empire. The galaxy was a jungle. Like times of old, the Crag'nik were the predators and everyone else was the prey. Emperor Vergus said nothing as his hands came up to his armored head. The entire audience held their breaths as the mechanical whirls indicated the removal of a helmet. The man underneath had pale, milky skin of an almost deathly pallor. Combined with his glowing orange eyes, the Emperor had the appearance of a vampire. His respirator did not come off. Emperor Vergus had been amongst the less fortunate of human society. He was born on rock bottom as a homeworlder, and that meant he was born in the darkest pit of the pecking order. On the irradiated surface of Earth, there was only a wretched existence of being subject to the radiation and the Noxite, the material which had fueled Earth's irradiated apocalypse. Vergus needed his respirator, even where there were clean air, simply because of the damage he had suffered at his birth, choking in the poisonous air like so many of his fellow homeworlders. The Emperor had been born at the bottom, but dreamed of the top, and eventually he reached there. That was not just his story, for it was the story of humanity. Lowly apes, who only by nature of their own cunning and intelligence could succeed in a lush world dominated by predators and monsters. As the dawn of the space age occurred, humanity's own enemy had been itself. When the Noxite War occurred, it was only through the cleverness of humanity that they fled to distant stars or underground. Those who were unfortunate had to remain on the surface, every day braving the harsh reality of an irradiated world. This was humanity's price for where it was today, and the Centaurian Empire was the product it had earned. There was a brief moment of silence before one could see the lightning-fast movement of the Emperor Vergus. His armored hand shot in the chest of the Lord Zulan with speeds few could keep up with. In the next moment, before Zulan could catch as much as gargle his final breaths, the human Emperor had torn out the Crag'nik tyrant's beating heart. Zulan fell to the ground, his corpse still leaking out a puddle of bluish blood. The Crag'nik had worked for nothing. The enemies were only docile, the meek, and the defenseless. In the war against a foe who had matched them on all fronts, be it cunning or sheer brutality or even the urge for conquest, that would make them prey. End of story. Story number 2. Monkey Throw Rock, written by Dragonson04. We humans were considered to be quite pathetic things compared to many in the galaxy. In spite of our reasonable level of advancement, nearly all other species thought of us as only a step above our most primitive primate relatives. Even though we achieved independent FTL travel several decades ago, we were looked down on as little more than monkeys. We were scrappers, junkers, dumpster divers, and scroungers, to use our words. Things that were outdated by years of the rest of the galaxy were taken and used by us. Anything and everything was of value and use, no matter what it did or what it looked like. And use them we did. No two human-made ships ever looked the same. In those early years, one could be based around the hull of a light patrol vessel from one race, and the next one would be twice the size based on a cargo ship of another race. Whatever the galaxy threw out, the humans picked up and used. One of the major weaknesses was the more or less standardized weapon system. The standard was decided on through centuries of trial and error long before we achieved FTL. All of them were fundamentally the same, and they all shared a fundamental structure that could easily be shut down if you knew what you were doing. In this case, an energy disruption field caused by an overclocking their shields by 25% was enough to shut down our weapons. Their weapons also stopped working, but without weapons of our own, they didn't need theirs. Any ship trying to pass would be assessed and destroyed, and then the shields would go back up. Large guns, small point defense guns, planet killers, and personal defense weapons were energy-based. Massive, powerful lasers, exawatts in strength, were for the largest ships and planet killers. Far less powerful plasma power was for point defense and personal defense weapons. Energy all around, but sharing the same fundamental weakness. When the Bushkat declared war, their fleets effectively sealed off the inner part of Sol system at the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, hoping to strangle humanity's trade with the rest of the galaxy. The energy weapon countermeasures were put in place, and humanity was disarmed overnight. The demands then came quick. They were the usual demands of tyrants, the whole submit or die mentality, and your children will be slaves nonsense. Of course, being human, you know, never to threaten our children. So, the scrap fleet of humanity went out to the asteroid belt, completely disarmed of energy weapons. They asked if this was our official surrender. It wasn't. We remained silent. They asked if this was our final stand. It wasn't. We remained silent. They asked if we were begging for mercy. We weren't. We remained silent. While they asked us these asinine questions, how larger ships were moving through the asteroid belt, tractor beams of thousands of miles of cables were dragging asteroids of all sizes behind those ships, everything from fist size to a decent piece of moon size. The ships, when they had enough forward momentum, went into nosedives almost simultaneously. Tractor beams disengaged and cables were cut. The asteroids kept moving forward. The one and only communication that we sent back to the Bekat fleet was this: monkey throw rock, monkey break. End of story. The algorithm reckons you should be watching this video next, and I recommend that you should be always watching my video. So, click with energy! And yes, clicking that does help the channel. Thank you very much. I'd just like to give a quick thanks to the T5 channel members and patrons: Alithia, Parky, Fudic Yol, Meridian117, Cam Maxwell, Casper Arnholtz, Angry Marine, Lord Azrakal, and White Van 420.